Good evening everyone, welcome to another Cyclone Chasers Cyclone video update to the public today, the 25th of February 2016. My name's Chris Nitzo. This update is sponsored by our major sponsor Campbell Scientific Australia, when measurements matter. On the Oz Cyclone Chaser subscriber weather centre here we can see a lot of cloud activity associated with a trough system across central Australia, producing scattered showers and thunderstorms. We're also seeing scattered showers and thunderstorms here across the inland parts of WA. Now the other area of interest which isn't shown on this chart is Ex Tropical Cyclone Winston. Now, Winston was downgraded and he looks like an absolutely sickly mess here. You can see the rotation still very clear on satellite imagery, but you can also see that when we look at the colour enhanced imagery, the system is unable to pack a punch on anywhere more than its southwestern quadrant, purely and simply because it doesn't have the ability to sustain thunderstorm activity over the centre due to wind shear. Wind shear is the change of direction or speed of the winds with height through the atmosphere. And for cyclones to grow and maintain themselves, they have to be able to produce thunderstorms right around the centre of circulation. And you can see it's not doing that well at all. So what we can see here on the satellite when we look at a zoomed in picture of it, we can see that it's moving to the west-southwest and it's moving very quickly. Computer models suggesting it'll continue moving west-southwest into tomorrow morning. By tomorrow morning, though, it'll start to slow down, and then for a couple of days, it'll probably just sort of sit in and around this area here off the southeast coast of Queensland, while it makes up its mind as to whether or not it's going to travel here to the southeast or up here to the northwest. If it moves to the northwest, it'll do so, and this is the more likely scenario, by the way, it'll do so as a very weak low. So the only thing it will do, and there is no threat whatsoever, and there's no chance of it redeveloping into a tropical cyclone as it moves through this region, because there's a lot of dry air in this region. The other thing that cyclones need, and I didn't mention that, is they need moisture through a really large layer and depth of the atmosphere. They're not going to have it. This low is not going to have it on its way up here to the north. When it finally does get, if it survives the trip all the way to Papua New Guinea, right at the top up here, the situation becomes perhaps a little bit more interesting, but only slightly. The PNG region is also in a monsoon break pattern at the moment, so there's very little moisture for it to tap into, even if it gets into the equatorial regions. So if we take a look at the microwave imagery here, there's very little of this system left. There's a circulation centre probably right in there. There is an element of, intense convection, but it's very localised in only one part around the centre. It's about to track through waters that are going to be too cold for it to redevelop into a tropical cyclone. It may encounter some slightly more favourable shear conditions over the next 24 hours, and that's why computer models, when we go back to the one I just showed you, are maintaining some level of intensity for this system over the next 24 to 48 hours due to a lack of wind shear as it progresses in this area. But as it gets into the 48-hour time frame, wind shear will increase, dry air will increase, and the whole thing is dead and buried. Now, the Bureau of Meteorology have cancelled the cyclone warning or cyclone watch for Norfolk Island, but that does not mean that Norfolk Island won't be receiving some very uncomfortable conditions overnight tonight. Probably going to see wind gusts up around that 100-kilometre-an-hour mark. Remember, when we were looking at those satellite images, we could see that the system packs a punch still to the south, even in terms of its cloud signatures, and that's exactly also where it packs most of its punch in terms of wind. And if we take a look at that wind field, Norfolk Island this afternoon and evening, we can see conditions quite uncomfortable there, 30 to 35, possibly up to 35 to 40 knots even, some of those winds overnight tonight. Now, the system's not considered a cyclone by the Bureau of Meteorology because it does no longer packs a punch for more than halfway around the centre of circulation, and that's why they have cancelled the cyclone watch. However, that doesn't mean you're not going to see cyclonic conditions. And I guess that's always a bit of a public debate, as to whether or not, when we're still going to see very similar conditions over the island, do you cancel the cyclone watch because of a technicality, or do you keep people on alert? And it's always a difficult decision, and it's not clear cut. But anyway, look, at Norfolk Island, you're going to see Category 1 conditions overnight tonight and into tomorrow morning. As we get into the early to mid parts of the morning tomorrow, conditions ease right back to around about 15 to 20, even 20 to 25 knots. Alright, let's bring southeast Queensland into view here, and let's check out the wind field here and how it could affect southeast Queensland. So still looking at very light winds tomorrow, but by probably about tomorrow evening or tomorrow night, we'll see that as the cyclone or the remnants of the cyclone track to the west, we'll see conditions deteriorate slightly on the water there, getting up to about 20 to 25 knots right through the Sunshine Coast, Gold Coast, all through this region. Getting up to 25 to 30s is possible on the Saturday morning. You can see this yellow area right here. Now the winds are coming in from the south, and that's never good news for rain. And so what we're going to see, fairly light falls, because when winds come from the south, they bring in a fair amount of dry air. And you can see here, there's no real heavy rainfall anywhere near that southeast Queensland coast, even though you're seeing winds of 25 to 30 knots. So it's a bit of a in fact, not bit, it's a very disappointing system in terms of the sort of weather it'll bring to us. There are signs that as it tracks a little bit further to the west and north, that the flow may become a little bit more onshore near the border here and around the Gold Coast region, so that could enhance the shower activity as we go into Sunday from the system here. But you can see it's a very weak system, and you can see the convection is mostly here packed on the southern side of the system. For subscribers, we'll have heaps more detail about this stuff tomorrow, but for those of you in the general public, there is no cause for alarm from this system at all. For our Western Australian followers, there is a little bit of interest happening over WA over the next few days as a little low pressure system just pops off the coast here around the West Kimberley or far northeastern Pilbara, and it pops off the coast and tracks fairly quickly away to the northwest. And it's up here in this area that we're expecting to see the development of another low, and that low is expected to then track to the west-southwest. So at this stage it doesn't look overly interesting, and you can see here the low finally next Thursday out here well to the south of Christmas Island, but pretty uncomfortably close to Cocos Island. So we can see that the system is starting to pack a little bit more of a punch out to about day 7 or day 8. The GFS is slightly less interested. However, it does eventually develop this low, and it develops it just a little bit further to the west compared to the Euro, and then continues to track it west as it develops into a tropical cyclone, and eventually gets out of our region. Only briefly develops it into a tropical cyclone though, before weakening it back into a trough. There's only one computer model that's suggesting a little bit of craziness out of this situation, which is the CMC computer model, and that has a cyclone developing out here and then whacking into the Pilbara. That's a really low percentage scenario, and I do think the CMC is struggling to develop the correct circulation. It's trying to develop something up here around Darwin instead of the actual real circulation. It's imagining one developing over here. So this will probably be the real circulation, and once the CMC gets onto that, then I think it'll come on board with all the rest of the models and track it away to the west-southwest. But it hasn't formed yet, and when we're talking about things that haven't formed yet, a lot of variables come into play, and so we will keep an eye on this system, and should there be any threat to WA into the future, will increase the frequency of these updates. Let's take a look at rainfall. Tomorrow, most of Queensland fine. There will be a little bit of shower and storm activity up here around the North Peninsula. A lot of shower and storm activity over the northwest top end region as we start to see the development of or not see the development of, but the continual motion to the west of a little trough across this region. We'll see showers and thunderstorms across the northern parts of WA. However, we'll also start to see a little bit of an increase in showers and storms in parts of the Pilbara and Gascoyne region as well. As we go to Saturday, this is when some of that cool stuff starts to happen near the coast here of the Pilbara and Kimberley, and that's with regards to that little circulation that pops off the coast and starts to rapidly move towards the northwest. The start of that will be probably on Saturday, and then that'll extend into Sunday. Across southeast Queensland, we'll see some isolated showers being brought on by those really strong winds coming in because of tropical cyclone, Ex Tropical Cyclone Winston. Remember, those winds around about that 23 to 28 knot mark are possible through parts of Saturday. You'll also see a decrease in shower and thunderstorm activity both around the North Peninsula and around most of the Northern Territory as drier, more stable air comes in to take its place. On Sunday, a surface trough develops across Queensland, and that surface trough, unfortunately, because Ex Tropical Cyclone Winston is there, is not being fed by enough moisture to create scattered showers and thunderstorms, but we will start to see the development of isolated showers and thunderstorms east of that trough line. As soon as Winston does bugger off, we will get a little bit more moisture to feed into that. But while it's sitting there, it makes life very difficult to try and get moisture into the state to feed that trough. You can see the Pilbara. This is a really exciting day for the Pilbara here in terms of shower and thunderstorm activity, and a drying trend across most of the Northern Territory and the eastern half of WA as all of those weather shenanigans start to push further westwards. As we go to Monday, we should see that low or that little circulation off the coast here pushing very fast up here to the northwest. Across Queensland, across the northern parts of Queensland, we will certainly see a bit of moisture returning, and that will allow for scattered showers and thunderstorms to develop across the northern parts of Queensland and extending to a more isolated extent further to the south towards the central inland parts of Queensland as well. You'll see Ex Tropical Cyclone Winston still dilly-dallying about here, not knowing what to do, and the idea at this stage, most of the computer models are starting to drift it further to the north. But the good news is that this trough system should, regardless of what this little weak ex-cyclone does, this trough system should produce some goods up here in northern Queensland. The Northern Territory dries out with only very isolated activity, so too for the Kimberley. There is a fairly strong trough system through the Gascoyne and Pilbara region that will produce showers and thunderstorms across Monday. As we look at the rain anomalies across the northern half of the country for this week, we can see, well, there's no surprises, is there? It's just bone dry for this time of year. It shouldn't be this dry, but it is. As we go to days 8 to 14, now by bone dry, I mean relatively speaking. So yes, there's going to be showers. Yes, there's going to be a couple of storms around, but not what you'd expect for this time of year. This time of year, we should be monsoonal in nature. We should be seeing widespread falls of 100 to 200 millimetres across very large parts of the north. We're not seeing any of that, and there's no hope of seeing that. As we go into week 2, there'll be a fairly strong ridge up around Queensland, and so therefore that ridging will produce scattered showers. The possibility of a trough system developing across the western Coral Sea could enhance that shower activity. We're hoping that this might push back towards the coast, so we'll see some of this green on the coast as opposed to falls that are just falling out here in the middle of the ocean. So fingers crossed that that might happen. But look, overall, it looks like another fairly dry week for most of Northern Australia in week 2. Cheers for watching. If you do like our video updates, we produce a hell of a lot more of them for our subscribers. So if you want to become a subscriber, your subscription helps us to chase cyclones and document more and more of them. Head to ozcyclonechasers.com.au and click on subscribe to OCC. Thanks very much for watching. I'll have another video update at this stage, assuming that there's no crazy little things that go on with both Ex Winston and our new little WA monster that we'll be watching. I'll have another video for you next Thursday. If something does start to pop up with those two systems, then I'll look at increasing the frequency, and I'll let you know both on our website and on social media if I will update this before next Thursday. Otherwise, I'll talk to you next Thursday. Have a great week.